Ralph Waldo Emerson, once said, "A child is a curly, dimpled lunatic." I don't know if you're on social media at all, but if you are, just know it's not social or media. But the best thing it does is it has memes. If you're unfamiliar with memes, it's a picture with some text on it. And my personal favorite, the reason I stay on social media, is for one particular source called The Dad. And it offers a lot of memes every day. And just from this past week, here's a couple of my favorites. The first one: I've been informed by my teen that a yes or no question in the morning is too much thinking. Are we up there? There we go. Yeah, too much thinking. All right, the next one: every parent becomes a hostage negotiator when their toddler seizes control of an open bottle of syrup. The panic level that goes through your heart when they grab that bottle, whew. The next one, this one literally just happened to me last week. My kid, after winning a soccer game, spending the afternoon at a pumpkin patch, going out for ice cream, and then being asked to go to bed at a normal time. Wow, today stinks. Worst day ever. And this one's especially applicable for today. Parenting is wild because it takes forever to see the effects of your decisions. Sometimes when I snap or blow it, I just think, wow, that'll be interesting to see how that turns out in 14 years. Parenting is a long-term game. We're in the midst of a series called 10 Words, and it's based on the 10 commandments that God gives to his chosen people, the nation of Israel, on Mount Sinai. And these 10 words are incredibly important. It's 10 commandments, 10 rules that God says to live by. And one of the big questions we should all ask is like, well, why did God feel the need to burden us down with so many rules? Anybody ever read those or see any of those obscure instructions, like the little plastic army man says, warning, do not eat this? And you're like, why would it possibly say that? Well, the answer is real simple. At some point, someone did it. And they're like, we have to now tell people not to do this. As absurd as that is. Why did God need to give us the 10 commandments? Hey, don't kill each other. Well, it's because it took till the second generation of humanity for someone to say, I don't like that person, I'm just going to kill him. In fact, I would argue, looking back in the Garden of Eden, so God creates man and woman, Adam and Eve, the first couple, and before they even get kicked out of this perfect paradise, I would argue that they've broken commandments 1, 5, 8, 9, and 10. Yeah, it's a little bit ridiculous. So God has to give us these commandments because they're all things that we don't do naturally. Or we do them naturally, and we shouldn't be doing them naturally. So today we're looking at the fifth commandment, Exodus chapter 20, verse 12. If you have your Bibles, go ahead and flip over to there. Exodus chapter 20, verse 12, just one verse. That's all we're looking at today. And it says this. It says, honor your father and mother, that your days may be long in the land that your Lord your God is giving you. So today is not about parenting. I want to say that right up front. It's not about parenting, because only some of us out here are parents. Today is about how we treat our parents. So whether you're a little one, like right there, or you're have more candles on your cake. Whether your parents have already been passed away for years, this lesson still applies to you. Honoring your parents is something that you will do your entire life, or should do for your entire life. So today what we're going to look at is we're going to make a couple of observations, make a couple implications, and then look at application. So a couple of observations. First, this forms a major transition point in the 10 words. Jesus in the 10 Commandments Jesus in the New Testament is asked to summarize the law, the 611 or 613 laws. And Jesus says this, he says, love God and love others. And Christians through the centuries have looked at the 10 Commandments and say they kind of break up into those two categories. Love God is the first 4 commandments. We've seen, as Joe's gone through, undivided allegiance, the first commandment, and that means God first. Undiminished worship means God only. Untarnished name, God reverencing. And unhindered rest, God reflecting. The next 6 commandments, or the second tablet, if you will, have to do with loving others. Honoring parents is this week. Honoring life, honoring marriage, honor property, honor reputation, honor in the heart. We do the last 6 because we believe the first 4. That's the first observation, is that this is a major transition in the 10 Commandments. The second observation is that this is a positive command. It's the only purely positive command among the 10. Meaning it's the only command that is strictly do this. All the others are negative commands in that they're don't do this. Don't kill each other. This one is a positive command. Do this. Some argue the command we looked at last week, remember the Sabbath day and keep it holy. But really, when you get down into that and start looking at what that looks like, it's a list of things to not do. Don't work. Don't let anybody else work. Negative. So this is a positive command. Do something. And it leads to this. The third observation is that it's the only command that carries a promise. Only command that carries a promise. Paul in Ephesians chapter 6 is reflecting on this, and he says, children, obey your parents in the Lord, for this is right. Honor your father and mother, that it may go well with you. This is the first commandment with a promise. Now, a word about what this promise means. This promise, it's like the whole book of Proverbs. Proverbs gives you wisdom to live by and says, if you live by this, you will be blessed. This is not a guarantee. This is not a formula. This is not dominoes. You do this and this will inevitably happen. This is a general principle for life. And it's the same thing with this promise in the 10 Commandments. Your parents are older and wiser than you. They've had more life experience. Add on top of that, your parents love you. That's not to say every parent is flawless in their advice or in their wisdom, but that generally speaking, if you follow their guidance for life, you're going to avoid a lot of the hardships in life. That is, through the obedience to this command, you experience blessing. Through the obedience to this command, your days will be long. You'll avoid some of the inevitable hardships of life. Now, we began today by parents looking at some memes of children and how ridiculous they are. But I want to go to the Bible and just quickly highlight some of the examples of parenting in the Bible. Now, I need you to know this. This is going to be hard because I picked out the best examples of parenting in the Bible. So you're going to feel some shame, some guilt. You're going to feel some weight as you're being held up to the best, and I'm being 100% honest, the best examples of parenting in the Bible. I cherry-picked the best examples, okay? I ignored all the real bad ones because there's some bad parents out there. There's some bad parents in the Bible. We're ignoring those. We're picking the best, okay? So we're going to start with Adam and Eve. The first example of their parenting, we know the fall, the Genesis account, but the first example where they're parenting is found in Genesis chapter 4. And what we see them doing is leading their family in worship. They're teaching their kids who God is and how we relate to him, and they're doing sacrifices with their family. This is an amazing example. Yet, their kids murdered each other. Oh, and Adam and Eve did cause the fall of all of humanity. Let's go to the next parenting example we have in the Bible, Noah. Noah, it opens up, and he's the one righteous person on all the earth. The Bible describes him as righteous, and the New Testament picks up this theme as Noah's righteousness. And then in his parenting, he's working together with his kids. He's the avenue by which all of humanity is saved, and they're building this ark, and he's working together with his kids, and it's awesome. And yet, Noah gets passed out drunk naked in front of his kids. I won't ask for a raise of hands as who that's happened to. The next parental example is Abraham and Sarah. Okay? The New Testament, again, lifts them up as this pillar of faith, and their faith is commended. Hebrews chapter 11 has the longest passage is over Abraham and Sarah and how amazing their faith was. And Noah's described as righteous, and yet they lie repeatedly through the whole story. And then Abraham also has a whole, side family that's still to this day causing problems, millennium later. Remember, I'm picking the best of the best here, guys. Job, the whole book's about how righteous he is, and he maintains his righteousness. We see him leading his children in how to worship God, and him offering sacrifice on behalf of his kids just in case if they sinned. And his children offering sacrifice too, all getting along in unity, and yet all of his children get killed. And then his wife tells him to go commit suicide and die. How about Samuel? This priest chosen from before birth speaks on God's behalf, literally anoints kings, used by God. Here's God speaking to him. Yet at the end of his life, the children of Israel come to him and be like, dude, you got to do something. We can't let your kids rule in your place because they're the worst. Which is really saying something if the children of Israel are saying that. Let's go to the New Testament. Joseph, Jesus' stepdad. The Bible speaks in glowing terms about him. He's a righteous man, desiring to do the right thing. We see him leading his family to Jerusalem in worship. We see him following all the Jewish laws, and yet he loses his kid for 3 days. And then when Jesus begins his public ministry, he's dead. He's out of the picture. And I think that is kind of the ultimate summary of the problem, is that every single parent fails, even if it's something as inevitable as death. Every parent in the Bible fails, most of them spectacularly. Because the point of the Bible is that every human fails. Most of us spectacularly. And that brings us to the first implication, is that every parent fails. And every parent fails in 3 different levels. Every parent fails God. God, when he creates humanity, says, I want you to be my image and likeness here on earth. And every parent, no one, parent or otherwise, lives up to God's standard. We cannot possibly do what God has called us to do, to be his image and likeness in the world. I'm going to tell you the second half of a story right now. And the other morning, I had to apologize to my daughter. And we'll pick up that story later. But I'm trying to teach my kids the Lord's Prayer. And it begins with our Father who is in heaven. And I stopped and I was like, guys, who's your Father in heaven? God, Jesus. I said, yep. Who's your Father on earth? They're like, you are. Good job. I was like, hey, my job is to be an image of what God is. And I screw that up a lot, don't I? Yeah! Really quick on that one. We all fail to do what we are fundamentally called to do. And that leads us to our second failure. We fail others. Not only do we fail God in what he's called us to do, to be his image, but then we fail others in that we're not his image for them. For my children, I fail them. Everyone, no parent or otherwise, lives up to others' expectations of them. I don't trust that God is working, and so I provide more law than grace. I don't speak with the words that I should, and so I provide more condemnation than encouragement. I don't do the deeds that I should do, and so I provide more excuses than ownership. I don't have a thankful attitude, and so I provide more pride than humility. Every parent fails because every person fails. They fail God, they fail their others, and this is actually my favorite category to talk about. They fail themselves. No one, parent or otherwise, lives up to their own standard for themselves. You can use the Ten Commandments, and I think you should, as God's standard for what is right and wrong, but my favorite way is to sidestep all that right now and say, what's your standard for how people are to live? Because you can have different morals than I do. You can have a different standard for right and wrong, but I love the fact that your own conscience convinces you of your own guilt. If you say right is wrong and wrong is right for whatever I say is right, that's okay because you still don't obey. You still don't do what you think is right. Every single person, no one, parent or otherwise, lives up to their own standard for themselves. I yell when I should coach. I'm absent at times when I should have been present. I turn small things into big things, and I turn big things into small things. I turn hard issues into behavioral issues. Like the Apostle Paul, oh, wicked man that I am, the things that I want to do, I don't do, and what I don't do is what I do. It's really confusing. See, this leads us to our second implication, is that every parent needs a substitute redeemer. Every parent has had times when we're like, I need somebody to tap in for me. I need a substitute. I'm out, coach. I'm heading to the bench. We need someone who says, I will take this. In fact, this is the story that the Bible says this. Jesus came and lived the life we were meant to live. He subbed in for you. I don't know of too many parents that aren't like, I would have loved to have Jesus literally sub in for me when it comes to parenting. I don't know what to say. I don't know what to do. I reacted poorly. I wish Jesus would have been the one living in that moment. See, Jesus is the one to be our substitute. And then a redeemer. We need somebody who says, I will take these broken things and make them new. Like Joseph says when he confronts his brothers who literally threw him in a pit, then sold him into slavery. He's like, what you did, you meant for evil, but God is turning that into something good. God meant it for something good. How many of us wish that when we fail as a parent, God would take that failure and make it something new? That's exactly the story of the Bible, is that Jesus came, lived the life we were meant to live. He was our substitute, and then he died the death we deserve to die. He is our substitute redeemer, taking our brokenness and making it into something new. And here is where it comes back to honoring your parents, is that every child needs to understand that they're in the exact same position their parents are. That their parents are failures of God, of others, of themselves, and so are you. I want to get back to Exodus chapter 20 right now. See, when I started studying this, I got one word in and was gone. Because it's this word honor. And it's kind of the crux of the whole command is, what does this word mean? And so I started looking at it. Okay, I need to pause here. This is a nerd alert. This is going to get really nerdy. So just know that and stay with it, because I think the payoff will be worth it. The word honor is the Hebrew word kavod, K-A-B-A-D. And the B sounds like V for some reason, whatever. Kavod. And it means weighty. or heavy. And I was like, oh, that's interesting. I remember learning another word that meant weighty or heavy. And when I remembered what it was, it's the word glory. And I was like, oh, no, duh, obviously, weight, honor, and glory. That makes sense, kavod, kavad. The Hebrew word for glory is kavod. It's just one letter different, O versus A at the second half. Kavod, kavad. Both have this same root word of heavy. It's the same idea of heaviness. So I was like, okay, so where is kavod used in Exodus? I want to see the context here, see how the writer's using this, make sure it's in the same sense. And the word kavod is used in the immediate context of Exodus chapter 20. It's used back in chapter 16, and it's speaking of God's glory as it descends on Mount Sinai. And it's this weightiness, this awe-inspiring, earth-shaking cloud coming down, fire, just this amazingness. And kavod is always used, when it's speaking, it's always used in the positive sense. It's used of God, of man, even of the promised land. The glory of the promised land, its riches, its just abundance, it's amazing. It's heavy, but it's a good heaviness. It's the weightiness of seeing God for who he is. And when you see God for who he is, truly who he is, that's just amazing. It's a good thing. So I went back to kavod, honor. Well, why do we have two words that mean the same thing then? So I said, okay, so how is kavod, honor, used in Exodus? What's the difference here between kavod and glory? Why two words if they mean the same thing? It doesn't. Let's look at how it's used in Exodus. In Exodus chapter 5, verse 9, it says this: let kavod, work, be laid on the men, that they may labor at it and pay no regard to lying words. The context here, Pharaoh is speaking with Moses. The children of Israel are in slavery. And so Pharaoh says, after Moses has come to him, he says, hey, let their work be made kavod. Their work is going to be heavier. It's going to be harder. They're literally going to be carrying heavier loads now. Kavod. Heavy. The first time kavod is used in Exodus, it is speaking about what Pharaoh is doing to the Hebrew slaves' burdens. Okay. How is it used the next time? Well, in Exodus chapter 8, it uses the same word, kavod, again. And it says, but when Pharaoh saw that there was a respite, he kavoded and would not listen to them, as the Lord had said. By the way, it goes on to repeat this 9 different times, and it's the same word every time, kavod. So is he saying that he honored them and would not listen to them? Are we encouraging you in Exodus chapter 20 to go ahead and harden your heart towards your parents? So the second time kavod is used in Exodus, it's speaking of what Pharaoh did to his own heart. Now, I want to make it clear what I'm not saying, and then I'm going to tell you what I am saying. What I am not saying is that this word is the same, that it means the same thing in both times. When I'm saying it's translated harden your heart or increase your burden, that is one definition. There is another definition. One word that's spelled the same, that has different meanings. Comes back to nerdiness here. In the English, we call it a homonym. Spelled the same, looks the same, pronounced the same, but has different meanings, completely different meanings. An example of this would be the word light. Light can mean something that doesn't weigh very much. It can mean something that illuminates, or it can mean to get down off of something. That is not what the word kavod is. It is not a homonym, meaning same spelling, completely different meanings. There's another word, nerdy guys, English, and you can use this and sound really smart, a polysemy. A polysemy is a word that has spelled the same, different meanings, but parallel, okay? Think of the English word back, your back. It has different meanings. It can mean the rear part of your body. It can mean to support something. Or it can mean to move backwards, go back up, a spatial thing. All of them are parallel terms. They're different, they have different definitions. If you get back, the rear part of your body, and back to support something wrong, you're gonna end up confused. You're gonna end up with the wrong idea in your head. But they all are sort of parallel and share some similarities. That's exactly what kavod is. It's a polysemy, a parallel meaning word. Different, but sharing similarities. So here's what I am saying. That context determines meaning. Meaning, what is the context in which this word is used? Here's what I think is happening. The Bible is a very intentionally crafted book, and each word is significant and not chosen on accident. The authors intentionally chose a word that carries two different meanings for honoring your parents. It's meaning the positive way, but it's recognizing it's making a word play on heavy burden, because every use up to that point in the book has been the negative idea. Your relationship with your parents, this is the point, your relationship with your parents is always heavy. It's always a heavy thing. But context determines meaning. Some, your relationship with your parents has been a joyous, life-giving relationship. But for others of you, it's been a heavy burden. It's been carrying stones. For some of us, honoring our parents is easy. They're amazing people. And we feel blessed to have been known and raised by them. They give life. This is the kavod of honor. Just like glorifying God is easy when we see him for who he is, so is honoring your parents. It's easy. The burden is light. It's heavy, but it's a good thing. For others of us, honoring our parents is extremely difficult. For some of us, our parents have left a wake of destruction behind them that has scarred us and deeply wounded us, that we will take decades figuring out how to recover from. That is the kavod of honor, of carrying a heavy burden on the behalf of someone else. So in our application, I want to start with talking to that group of people. For those of you that honoring your parents is something that's difficult because you've been wounded by them, I want to give you 3 points that honoring them does not mean this. And then we'll look at what honoring does mean. If you've been wounded by your parents, I want you to know honoring them does not mean ignoring. Honoring them does not mean acting as if a wound never took place. Ignoring may mean that not ignoring may mean that you draw boundary lines from your parents. Establishing some space, some guidance, some rules there for what a healthy relationship will look like. Honoring your parents does not mean forgetting. Thinking like that wound never takes place. Not forgetting may mean that you sit down and have some real, honest, painful conversations with your parents about memories from your own childhood. And third, honoring your parents does not mean minimizing. It does not mean believing that the wound was not as significant as it was. I told you I'd come to that story. One night I yelled at my daughter and treated her harshly, caused some tears. And I knew I needed to apologize. So that next morning, in time when we were gathered together, I looked at her, Ariel, my daughter, and said, Ariel, I'm sorry. I should not have yelled at you in that way. She said, it's okay, Daddy. I said, no, Ariel, it's not okay. Don't minimize that hurt. And then I said, Ariel, will you please forgive me? You don't need to minimize the pain that your parents caused, but this is the first application of what honoring your parents does mean. It does mean forgiving them. Honoring does mean forgiveness. We forgive because we recognize that our parents, like ourselves, have failed. We forgive them because God forgave us. And so we freely offer that forgiveness. Not ignoring, not forgetting, not minimizing, but saying, I see what was wrong and I will forgive you. Right now there's some of my favorite commercials of all time on television from Progressive about new homeowners turning into their parents. It's done in a very humorous way, but I think it's a huge application for every single one of us. To recognize that we share more in common with our parents than we do differences. Not in the specific quirks that our parents have, although we will probably inherit those as well, but in the fact that we all, like every human being, shares more in common with all of humanity than we do any differences. We, all of humanity, have failed God, failed others, and failed ourselves. And so we freely offer forgiveness to our parents as a way to honor them, recognizing that God had to forgive us. The second way we honor our parents is by respect. They gave you life, and therefore it is your obligation to give them respect. Now, some of you are going to want to fight me on this definition, but it holds through the Bible, and I'll fight you on it right back. Respect is where fear and love meet. Respect is where fear and love meet. Fear in that they are the authority over you with both power and insight. Power and insight. Love in that they are your closest family with patience and forgiveness towards you. Respect is due your parents regardless of their actions or choices, simply because of their position as your parents. And the third application, this one is picked up a little bit more in Philippians and says explicitly, children, obey. Obedience is a way we honor our parents. Children, younger people, teenagers, whatever you want to say, give your parents the BOTD, benefit of the doubt. One of my favorite things I love to tell my kids is, oh yeah, Daddy really wants to cause you pain and to make your life miserable, don't I? I just hate you having any fun at all. I just like to lean in to what they're thinking I'm trying to do. I want you to be miserable. Your parents don't want that. They love you. They care about you. They want you to thrive and succeed and do better than they ever did. So children specifically are commanded, meaning it's not an option to obey. Unless your parent is telling you something clearly unbiblical to do, you are commanded to obey them as you would God. As we wrap up, the Bible is well aware of how flawed every parent is, because it's well aware of how flawed every human being is. Yet, the Bible still commands us to take up the weight of honoring them, whether or not they are worthy of that honor. For some of us in this room, the honoring your parents is a heavy burden. It is a hard thing. It's carrying stones in slavery. For others of us, it's a joyous burden. I want to say this as we close. This is the same way that God treats us. The Bible describes us as bound in sin, blinded by sin, dead in sin. When we were unlovable, God chose to love us. So in honoring our parents is one of the ways that we could choose, even when they're not honorable, even when they're not worthy of honor, we still make the choice to reflect God's character and nature and do something for them that they are not worthy of. And that's the challenge for every one of us today. To reflect God's character and nature in our attitudes and actions towards our own parents. Let's pray. God, we thank you for your love for us, for your patience, for your forgiveness. God, we thank you for the reminder that we all fail, and help us to have way more grace and forgiveness towards our own parents. God, help us to love them in a way that helps teach our kids to love and forgive those who sin against us. Thank you for your 10 words to us, and help us to live an abundant life through our obedience to them. In your name we pray. Amen.